Being a Jew is being a member of a tribe. Our rain doesn't fall in South Africa. Our rain falls in the land of Israel. Avraham, the Rebbe wants to talk to you.
Birthright is the quintessential peoplehood project of our generation.
I want to do what I can to ensure, or to try to ensure, that intermarriage does not have to be assimilation.
My name is Gidi Greenstein, and this podcast is my platform for exploring the condition and direction of the Jewish people. Flexigidity is a word I coined by combining flexibility and rigidity to capture what I believe is the secret sauce of Jewish resilience, recurring prosperity, and permanent leadership in humanity. It is also the name of a book I published 11 years ago with the title Flexigidity, the Secret of Jewish Adaptability and the Challenge and Opportunity Facing Israel. At the time, I observed that after decades of rising affluence and influence, the Jewish people might have passed its zenith and was entering a period of decline. Now, following the dramatic events of October 7 and Israel's war with Iran and its proxies, as well as the explosion of global anti-Semitism on the so-called October 8, it's time for a check-in. In this podcast, which I named Flexigidity, the podcast of the Hebrew man, I hope to orchestrate that discussion as someone who straddles both Israel and American Judaism. Professionally, I'm a societal entrepreneur and founder of the Reut Institute, one of Israel's most cutting-edge research, strategy, and leadership groups. I also founded Tikkun Olam Makers and spent years as a self-appointed peace diplomat. In addition, I'm a husband, father, and grandfather, and a committed long-distance runner. All of these aspects of my life will infuse this podcast. Avraham Infeld is one of my closest friends and one of the most influential Jewish educators of our time, which is why he's here. Avraham is a teacher of teachers for more than 5 decades across continents and communities. He has shaped the outlook of countless educators, rabbis, lay leaders, and Jewish professionals about their Jewish identity and their vision for their communities. Avraham's life work has been to revive, reframe, and make relevant the concept of Jewish peoplehood, which is particularly important in an era of polarization and disaffiliation. He has stubbornly insisted that our shared memory, language, sense of covenant, attachment to Israel, and commitment to one another matter more than what divides us. His now famous 5-legged table model has become a foundational tool in Jewish education, giving us a language to engage Jews of all backgrounds, not with fear, but with joy, not with guilt, but with meaning. Avraham is a serial entrepreneur and innovator. He was the first community emissary, Shaliach, of the Jewish Agency, founded Militz, was the first director of Birthright Israel, and led Hillel International. His work has impacted nearly every corner of modern Jewish identity. Avraham's ideas are powerful and inspiring, but what makes him legendary is his humor, mastery of the art of storytelling, his passion, and deep love for the Jewish people. His book, A Passion for a People, sold tens of thousands of copies. Avraham, thank you for being here. Let's dive in.
Thank you very, very much for honoring me with this, Gidi. I am so pleased to be on this Flexigidity podcast.
Please take us down a quick walk down memory lane. Where did you grow up and how did your family legacy shape you?
Thank you very much for that question, Gidi, because I believe that all of us are simply products of our own personal experiences. And I am without a doubt a product of the personal experiences. I'm a product of the fact that I was born to a particular family. I'm a product of the fact that I was born in South Africa. I'm a product of the fact that I was born to parents who were educators. I'm a product of the experiences that they allowed me to go through. My father grew up as a Hasid in Sants. His family moved to Vienna in 1919 at the end of the war, and my father gave up religion and carried with him the fervor that he had for Hasidism. He carried it over to Zionism, and he became a fervent Zionist. I don't know how they landed up in South Africa. There are various stories of how they landed up to be in South Africa. But I grew up in a home which was in many, many ways like growing up in Israel. The first language I wanted to learn in my life was Hebrew because my parents used to spend most of their time talking to each other in Hebrew, and neither of them were Israelis. I never saw my father in the synagogue, but I spent every Shabbat afternoon learning Talmud with my father while his head was uncovered and while he had a cigarette in his mouth. But Talmud was essential to his life. The foods we ate at home, the guests who entered our home, my father's leadership in the South African Zionist community, my mother's leadership in creating the first Jewish day school, of which I was the first pupil, all impacted on whom I am.
So you're a product of community leaders. But you also grew up in an environment in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa. So how did you balance the values that you saw at home with what was happening outside and around you?
Very interesting, because there were two impacts that South Africa had on me. My being South African, it was seeing and witnessing apartheid and being educated to hate apartheid, recognizing the bad values of apartheid. And yet I felt very comfortable in South Africa for another reason. Because everything else that defined me as a Jew sent me a message which said, being a Jew is being a member of a tribe. And that made me very comfortable in South Africa, because everyone I knew in South Africa was a member of a tribe. If you were white, you were either the Dutch tribe or the English tribe or the Jewish tribe. And if you were black, you had some 40 tribes you used to belong to. The society was a tribal society. It carried tribalism to its worst by the leadership of one tribe over another, or of the white tribes over the black tribes, racism and tribalism. But there was a warmth and a dignity in being a member of a tribe. From early childhood, I watched as my parents educated me and my sister to do what we can to ensure the continued significant survival of this tribe. And therefore, my concept of peoplehood was very natural to me. It grew out of that experience of living in South Africa and being part of a tribe.
We're going to go back to peoplehood in just a moment. I just want to ask you a question that I'm asking all of the guests here, and that is, what could we have seen about you when you were 7 or 17 that could have indicated who you are today?
I remember an incident of my learning Talmud on a Shabbat afternoon with my father. And we learned a tractate of Masechet Shabbat in which there's a discussion about how many Torahs do the Jewish people have. It's a debate between Hillel and Shammai. And my father was trying to explain this debate to me. Somebody wanted to convert and the different behaviors. But this idea of there being I was 7 years old. I remember that's why I'm glad you asked the question. I'm 7 years old and I'm learning about God gives the Jewish people a written Torah and an oral Torah. And I have the chutzpah to say to my dad, I don't understand this nonsense. Why in the world would God give the Jewish people an oral Torah? How long would it have taken him to write the oral Torah? Maybe 2 days. He built a world in 6 days. My father gets up from the other side of the table. He was sitting opposite me when we were learning. Comes round the table. I'm a 7-year-old. I wasn't very tiny. He gives me a hug and picks me up. And he says to me, Avraham, don't ever forget that question. You've asked perhaps one of the most important questions of Jewish life. Why did the Jewish people, or Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, dare to do something that God did not do? God refused to write the oral Torah. It was meant to be oral. It was meant to be passed down from generation to generation. It was meant to adapt itself from generation to generation. It was meant to accompany you in different situations. The moment the oral Torah was written down, and believe me, I study a daf of Talmud every single morning. To this day, it can be very limiting on Jewish life unless you view it as an oral law. And my father trained me to look at a page of Talmud as Jews over 2,000 years having a discussion, and here you're invited to participate in the discussion.
You raised a very important question, which is just a couple of comments before we move on. Why did Rabbi Yudana see in the second century actually write down the oral law? And the answer is because the Jews were under such peril at that time that he felt that everything was going to be forgotten. So he did something incredible, and that is to document and to create a Mishnah.
And what did that do? It had a side effect of creating a second written law.
Exactly. But at the same time, because we have all these mechanisms of interpretation, we see that our society evolves over time. And basically, you could say that, which obviously is the theme of this podcast, flexigidity, the flexible and the rigid, the innovation and the tradition of the Jewish people.
Reach the stage that you have that, and you're not entering into a conversation, but you're saying that he who lived in a previous generation, his opinion is more important than your opinion. You create a very stifling environment.
Exactly. But we cannot deny that the Jewish people has been evolving in dramatic terms in the last 150 years.
It's a fact. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did the right thing. It was the correct thing to do. It could have been forgotten, but it had an effect that has impacted on the Jewish people. My father taught me to fight that in every moment I spent with a page of Talmud in front of me.
So let's just go back to the concept of peoplehood, which is fascinating, and it's been as we said, your life work. Let's just spend a few minutes trying to define peoplehood. Do you want to start? Like, give your definition of peoplehood, and also let's kind of distinguish this from the other.
It's a very, very simple teaching. It's a teaching not of mine. It's not original. It's Mordechai Kaplan, my teacher. I got the concept from him. I'm often introduced as the father of peoplehood. I'm not the father of peoplehood. I may have been involved in the creation of the Hebrew word amiyut. But the concept of peoplehood is a basic understanding that the Jews are first and foremost people. When Ruth says to Naomi, I'm going to go with you. I'm not going to turn my back on you like my sister, like Orpah. I'm going to go back to the land with you. I'm going to stay with you. Ki amech ami velohayich Elohai. And Giddy, the order is not accidental. It's a proud, bold statement that Amech Ami is what defines us.
So basically, the logic of peoplehood, just Avraham, is that we are a tribe, we're a family, we have a shared legacy.
We're a family. A family
Yes.
grows into a tribe, and a tribe grows into a people.
Right, and it has a shared legacy and a shared destiny, and that what connects us.
And we have a commitment to ensure the lessons of the culture and the civilization of this people. We have a commitment to bear and share memories of this people, that things we do as Jews be interpretations of our former memories. This is a basic understanding of who we are. Religion. Look, I begin in South Africa. I come with a sense of tribalism. And now you ask me about the age of 17. I was 3 months before the age of 17 when I graduated high school. My father says to me, takes me for a walk. He says to me, Avram, we are going to have to part for a few days, for a few years. I said, Dad, where are you going? He said, I'm not. You are. I said, where am I going? He said, there is now a Jewish state. Goodbye. I knew it was going to come one day. I really had reasons to remain in South Africa. I had a beautiful girlfriend. I didn't want to go to Israel. My father said, You finished high school. I landed in Israel 3 months before I turned 17, alone as an immigrant to a new country, deeply knowing. My father never said to me, go and become an Israeli. He never ever said to me, go to live in Israel. He said to me, you're a member of the Jewish people. We now have a Jewish state. That's where you have to be. My coming to Israel was a product of my being a member of the Jewish people. I became an Israeli by virtue of the fact that I was a member of the Jewish people.
Avraham, so basically, we have the story of peoplehood. I just want to distinguish it from the other stories that are competing for the Jewish identity. The other story is that we are a religion, that we are as a group and individuals, we have a special relationship with God. There's another story of us as being a nation who are connected to a specific place on the face of this earth.
Exactly what happened to me when I was 3 months younger than 17. I arrive in this country and I meet my relatives in Israel, all of whom are Israelis. All of whom say to me, oh, it was so important to you for you to be Jewish in South Africa, but now you've come to Israel, you can stop being Jewish. I didn't know what they were talking about. It was my first meeting between the tribe and the nation. It took a long, long time for me to be able to find the connection between the two.
And there's a fourth story that we're a group of people that we have a mission to humanity, to be a light unto the nations, to tikkun olam, to repair the world. So basically, we have four founding stories here that are competing for the Jewish identity, that we have a mission to humanity, that we're a nation, we're a people, and we're a religion. And what you're saying, and I'm saying I agree with you, is that underlying an overarching story of the Jewish people is that of Judaism is that we are a people, we are a tribe and a family with a shared destiny and a shared history. And the beauty of this story is that it transcends all divisions. You could be a left wing and a right wing, a Zionist and an anti-Zionist. You could be a religious or a secular person, live in Israel or the diaspora. The story of Jewish peoplehood embraces everybody. And that is why I think that the work that you have done has reached so many people over the years, because you have raised the flag of the connecting narrative of all Jews.
Giri, I never fought that sense of understanding of young Israelis that they are Israelis. I devoted many, many years of my life to educating in Israel young Israelis to the understanding that they are Israelis by virtue of their being members of the Jewish people. I educate Jews from all over the world, Israel and elsewhere, towards tradition and towards memory and towards belief and towards transcendentalism and towards moral behavior, not just to be just, because that is what they are committed to do as members of the Jewish people. That is why it is not only the overarching, it is definitely the underlying. It provides the rootedness for all of these other views. It's the rootedness of being an Israeli by virtue of my being a Jew.
So, the first time I met you, I don't know if you remember that, I was 1994, was 30 years ago, and the first story you told, which actually, in retrospect, changed my life, was a story about peoplehood. It was a story about the reign of the Jews of South Africa. Of course, I can tell it, but you can tell it 10 times better. So, can you do that for the benefit of the audience here?
I'm growing up in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was very interested in sports. There was a major championship game happening sometime in November, and I knew that my team is going to win the cup. And I wake up the morning and I find many of my friends are praying for rain. Giddy in November. I don't know anyone in South Africa who wants rain in November. It's the wrong time of the year. It's the wrong season of the year. I get very nervous. I run to my father. I said, Dad, stop them. I don't need rain today. My father looks at me, pats me on my shoulder, and says, Avram, relax, relax. Our rain doesn't fall in South Africa. Our rain falls in the land of Israel. I challenge anyone to try to grow up normal with an answer like that.
So first of all, it's a great story. All Southern Hemisphere Jews, from Argentina to Australia, face that dilemma. Do you pray for the rain at Sukkot as opposed to hoping for the dew? But I do want to say that this is an remarkable story because it's a peoplehood story. It's a story that brings all of us together. It connects us to the land of Israel, of course, every Jew around the world. But also, I think that it's very interesting that the Jewish calendar around the year is anchored in the agricultural cycle of the land of Israel. So basically, every Jewish person lives the cycle of the land of Israel. So the agricultural cycle of the land of Israel. And that I find fascinating. Avram, I do want to say to you that preparing for this conversation, I asked ChatGPT the following question, and it's a quote. Who are the greatest educators of the Jewish people of our time? All right, top 10. Here is the list. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which honestly for me would have been number one, Rabbi Soloveitchik, because of the thousands of rabbinic students that he shaped, and he basically shaped modern Orthodoxy. And number 6 is Avraham Infeld. Now, granted that ChatGPT may have noticed that I'm interested in you and maybe trying to play nice to me, but you are number 6 according to ChatGPT. I'll just give you number 7. It's Greenberg, Shlomo Karlibach, Noam Pianko, Erica Brown. I would add to the list David Hartman and, of course, Doniel Hartman. And I know that David Hartman was your teacher, and obviously Mordechai Kaplan. So basically, you're way up there in terms of your, being the Jewish educator of the last of our generation. But I do want to ask you about these people, because I know you have known some of them. So let's start with David Hartman. What was David Hartman's contribution to the advancement of the notion of peoplehood as you have known it?
David Hartman was the person who helped me root my concept of peoplehood in textual basis, in tying it to traditional thinking. He gave me validation of my concept of peoplehood by providing me and teaching me. I worked with him for years. I loved him very, very deeply. My memories of him are great, but he is among all of those people, the person who helped me root the things I sensed, the things I felt, the things I reacted to in Jewish learning, in Jewish textual learning. He was one of the great leaders or teachers of mine.
And he created one of the most important, significant institutions, which is, of course, the Hartman Institute.
The Hartman Institute, which I worked for him. And there are names on that list that are missing on that list. I want to say something about Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs was more of a friend of mine than a teacher of mine. But his books and his writings and his ability to create a sense of the inner ties between different kinds of Jews was very, very important to me. I worked for years in London. I worked there during the time that he was finishing being a student at the Jews College. Everybody was already talking about him as a future chief rabbi. It was quite obvious that was where he was going. And he was definitely among that list and somebody who I've always appreciated.
Can you just say also in a few sentences about Mordechai Kaplan, and because you mentioned him earlier, and how did Mordechai Kaplan influence your thinking? And then if you connect that also to Soloveitchik.
I've never met a more misinterpreted individual than Mordechai Kaplan. Mordechai Kaplan was the individual who, more than any other, conceptualized the idea of the Jews being a people. He was a rabbi. He was American. He was for a while, his last few years, my teacher. Um I was very heavily influenced by his book on Judaism as a civilization. Uh, he put into words the words of Jewish peoplehood. I tried to apply from what I learned from Mordechai Kaplan to looking at a situation of Jewish existence in which Mordechai Kaplan was so misunderstood that American Jewry turned him into a denomination. He who clearly defined that Judaism was not a religion, that it is the underlying principle uniting all Jews, made that a fourth denomination. That for me was very strange. One of the most difficult things for me to apprehend when I eventually meet with American Jewry.
Well, Avram, actually, I think this is a great transition because, first of all, it's really interesting that you trace your thinking and your legacy to David Hartman, to Mordechai Kaplan, Rabbi Sachs.
That's why I was just about to say that. These are all American leaders. I had some very, very powerful Israeli leaders who affected my life. Probably foremost among them was Professor Eli Schweid. Eli Schweid, who was, in my opinion, the person who most understood what happened to the Jewish people when the Jewish people met with modernity. What were the changes? What were the reactions of the Jewish people to modernity? That understanding the lack of uniformity and how this lack of uniformity happened and why it happened, and being considered an understanding of the different interpretations that people gave to the Jewish people's confrontation with modernity is the first step towards rebuilding unity. It's very easy to have unity when you're in a closed ghetto. What happens when you meet an outside world and that world impacts on different Jews in different ways? You create a lack of uniformity. This all happened at the same time.
I actually think that this kind of back and forth in Judaism between extreme traditionalist approach and modernity happened in the past as well. We see it also in the days of the Roman empires. There were Jews who went with Hellenism, and there were Jews who responded by secluding themselves and rejecting the ideas of what was then modernity, which was Hellenist worldview. So basically, we see this tension through our times.
There was something very, very specific with modernity. And that modernity really encouraged us to recognize only my interpretation as the only legitimate interpretation. What I learned from Mordechai Kaplan and from Eli Schweid on lessons of modernity is that understanding what brought this about could help us in our time struggle to create a world in which we do not have to be uniform in order to be unified.
I want to ask you, I want just to take this conversation forward because you were also an entrepreneur and you created and you led organizations. And the common denominator among all of these organizations is that they were inspired by and served the ideal of peoplehood. So I want to take you through a journey of your professional leadership and just tell us how this notion of peoplehood informed the different things that you did in your career. And the first, I want to start with your being the first, I think, community Shaliach in Baltimore, right? It was in Baltimore in the 1970s.
Yeah. Listen, the years between my being 17 and the years of my being 25 were years which were devoted to my studies. I didn't do much of education. But my work in education began in 1920, in 1965, before the Six-Day War, at a very, very important institution in Netanya called Upanakiva, which people don't recognize its uniqueness. It was an Upan, but not an Upan for new immigrants coming to live in Israel. It was a private institution. New immigrants came to study there, but also Jews who wanted to improve their Hebrew from the diaspora came to study there. Rabbis who wanted to improve their conversational Hebrew came to study there. Arabs who wanted to be able to work in Israel came to study Hebrew there. And in 1967, this became also an institution for teaching Jews Arabic. And it became a place in which there was a mifgash between all the elements of the Jewish people and all the residents of the state of Israel. And there was a confrontation there that was brewing. It was my first employment. It was the first place I began to work as an educator that gave me the tools and the sensitivity to understand why people very often argue over things that do not have to be argued over. I then went from there on shlichut to America. I, the Jew from South Africa, who had bumped into I come here with tribalism, bumped into nationalism, now arrive in America and for the first time meet religion, not observance. I was already an observant people, but I never defined being Jewish as a religion. The word Jew and religion had nothing in common with each other. It was the culture of my people. I arrive in America and I hear all over the place Protestants, Catholics, Jews. Jews are another religion. I meet for the first time with the concept of conversion to Judaism. Jews never converted to Judaism before Germany and America. They went through Giur. The word Litgayer is not to convert. The word Litgayer comes from the Shoresh Lagur, to live with, to share Goral with. I come to America where a non-Jew becoming a Jew is called a converted Jew. My God, Diddy, you can't understand my shock. It was like a nail in the coffin of peoplehood. The more we talk about conversion to Judaism, rather than adoption by the Jewish people, the more we undermine the sense of peoplehood. I'm a Fabrenta anti-convert. I love non-Jews who become Jews. But I'm against conversion. I love them for agreeing to be adopted into my people.
Avraham, but tell us a little bit about this creation of the concept of a community Shaliach. What was revolutionary about that?
Okay, so the reason I responded it to, I didn't know America, and I responded to, and a gentleman by the name of Morel Bar-On, who was chief education officer, among the best chief education officers, and my officer in the army, becomes the head of the Jewish agency and calls me one day and says to me, Avraham, I want to talk to you. I go to see him. He says, listen, I became the head of the Jewish agency's Department for Youth in America. I see that we're spending a fortune on sending shlichim to Zionist youth movements in America. I don't understand that. I want to try an experiment and see the Jewish state develop a relationship of shlichut to the entire Jewish people, not only to the members of the Zionist world, not only to members of the Zionist youth movements. I want somebody to represent the state of Israel in its dealings, in its negotiation, in its education, in its treatment of diaspora Jewry. And that's why I've decided I want to send community shlichim to the United States of America. I'm asking you, because of all your talk on Jewish peoplehood, this is an opportunity to test it. I want you to go and be the first community Shaliach in the United States of America.
The revolutionary idea there was you're not going there with the purpose of encouraging Aliyah. You're going there in order to support the identity of the community, the cohesion of the community, the relationship of that community with Israel.
Right. That community with Israel, and the centrality that Israel should be in the community for the sake of the community, not for the sake of Israel. This comes back to my deep feelings. I couldn't stand that the Jewish agency had a department for Chinoch Yehudi Bagola. אין כזה דבר חינוך יהודי בגולה, Jewish education for the diaspora. There's Jewish education for the Jewish people, whether they live in Israel or they live in the diaspora. I said to Morona, what does a Shaliach Kilati, what does a community Shaliach do? He says to me, Avraham, I don't know. You're the first. Just go and try. What an unbelievable challenge. What an unbelievable gift I was given. What an unbelievable opportunity. What confusion. What suffering from meeting the Americans' misunderstandings of things that are being Jewish. I learned so much from that experience. I learned that if you're going to build people, or you're going to have to talk to Jews abroad about a relationship with Israel, is not demanding of them either aliyah or financial support. It's demanding of them to understand that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people wherever the Jewish people choose to live.
Take us forward to the milites. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to show how this idea of peoplehood was implemented across your career over 50 years.
I'm about to return from Israel, from America, being a community shaliach, not knowing what I'm going to be doing in Israel. I couldn't imagine what I would be doing in Israel. With all of these experiences I had, going through this difficult work, I didn't know what I was going to try to do in Israel. I gave up education and I decided to take a job in Israel in what was the beginning of data retrieval. A Jew in Baltimore had invested in a data retrieval company, offered me a job when I go back on Shlichut, from Shlichut. Before I come back to Israel, I took a very, very well-known Jew who later became a prime minister. I don't want to mention who it is. I took him to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We came to him. They spent together about 45 minutes in a room. And this very prominent Israeli comes out and he says to me, Avram, the Rebbe wants to talk to you. I'm not a Chabadnik. I had no Hasidic ties. I was just accompanying this person because he was very Israeli and was afraid to go to meet the Rebbe alone. He wanted me to go with him. He came out, he said to me, the Rebbe wants to talk to you. I go in and I meet the Rebbe. It was a weird feeling. I felt that I'm meeting with something that I can't interpret into simple words. The Rebbe comes over to me and very affectionately takes my hand and holds it in his two hands. And he says to me, Avraham, Bleibt in Chinoch. Avraham, stay in education. How did he never met me. He didn't know anybody who knew me. How in the world did he know that I was about to leave education? That's two words, Bleibt in Chinoch, 3 words, whereby one of the people of this list of the great Jewish educators, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, impacted my life.
Ava, before you continue, I want to say that there's a list of 10 greatest, and you have met personally 5 of them at least. Sachs Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, Mordechai Kaplan, Yitz Greenberg, and David Hartman. And I do want to say that your story is just like the story of Rabbi Sachs, who also credits the Lubavitcher Rebbe of having that pivotal, life-changing intervention that left him on the rabbinical track.
Jonathan and I often spoke about it. It was an unbelievable reaction. He saw right through me. He knew what I was going through. He said to me, stay in Chinoch. And I canceled the job. I canceled the contract. I came back to Israel without a job. I went back to Moro Habaron. I said to him, I want a job. What can I do? He said, what do you want to do? I said to him, listen, if Jewish education in America demanded of me as an Israeli to ask the Jews to turn towards Israel and absorb what they can from Israel, I would like to find a way of working with Israelis in order to try to get them to understand that they are Israelis by virtue of their being members of the people and the connection to the diaspora. And their ties with diaspora are inherently necessary for this to happen in Israel. Mara Baron says to me, I've just had a phone call from the Prime Minister, Golda Meir, who said to me, Golda Meir, spoke recently at a high school. I see that it was a terrible experience. This is 1970. It was after the 6 Day War. A lot of hubris among Israeliness. Very little. She said they were saying, make peace, make love, not war. All kinds of Americanism. She said to Mara, what are you going to do about trying to get Israelis to begin to think of themselves as Jews? Mara says, I have a job for you. He gave me a budget of 125,000 shekel lirot and said, go and do with it what you can.
Beautiful. So fast forward, I want to focus on the next thing, which is Birthright Israel. So you spent, obviously we can't cover Melitz. You've been in Melitz almost 20 years, I believe. But then comes Birthright Israel. So tell us how this evolution of the notion of peoplehood in your life brings you to appreciate the opportunity to appreciate the idea of Birthright Israel.
What was very, very profound to me was the concept, which was not my idea. It was an idea of a common friend of the two of us, our friend Yossi Balin. He was the person who thought of the concept of giving young Jews a free trip to Israel. Michael Steinhardt and I put it into different words. How do we create a world in which every Jewish child born in this world will be born with a ticket to Israel already tied to their umbilical cord? It will be very difficult for the doctors, very painful for the mothers, but wonderful for the Jewish people. Because try to imagine this kid who grows up, who's lying in bed, just born, and he has a ticket to Israel tied to his umbilical cord. Mary in the next bed has nothing tied to her umbilical cord. What is that? Oh my God, it's a ticket. Oh no, it's to the Middle East. What the hell is this all about? Why would the Jews of the 20th century take a major step of giving Jews of the 21st century a gift of a free trip to Israel? What an amazingly big idea. And I became the first director of Birthright, the director of the entire planning of the program, which is when we met for the second time. You and your team and the American team that I created and that matched with you built the program of Birthright that in many ways is still central to Birthright's functioning to this day. It is a very, very profound idea. You are going on a trip to a country. You are not going to another country. You're taking a trip to a place where you're going to tour your own soul. You're going to tour your own memory. You're going to tour your own person. You're going to try to find others who think like you and don't think like you. You're going to ask yourself, how did this happen? And I'm going to build a staff that is going to try to deal with how do they help these young people deal with these questions. What an amazing challenge. What a phenomenal activity. Getting the products of Birthright, any of the Birthright kids, whatever program they went on, if you met them 2 weeks later and you asked them how was the trip, you 99% of the time you got the response, it changed my life. What the hell changed my life? What were they saying? What were these young people coming on Birthright, coming to Israel, actually saying when they're saying it's changed my life? What they were saying was, what I thought being Jewish is not necessarily so. It can be something else. And that is when the need came to try to build programs to follow up on the experience, not as a revival of a 10-day trip to Israel, but building on the questions that a 10-day trip to Israel evokes in someone who has a very, very different idea of what it means to be a Jew. So, can you imagine what a wonderful tool this is to provoke profound questions in American Jews, which is what I've been trying to do for 25 years with Israeli Jews, the same questions.
So I remember, I have to say, you mentioned that I created the Israeli team that designed Birthright. And I remember our first meeting with you when you were introduced to us as the incoming director of Birthright. Of what it wasn't even then called Birthright, by the way. If you remember, it was called the voucher program of all names, as if all these participants are going to be getting vouchers to go to Israel. But so you come in, we presented to you our ideas about how to implement this incredible vision of Dr. Yossi Beilin. And what you said is, Birthright cannot be an Israeli idea. It has to be an Israeli-American project, which is why later, 3 months later, we met a team in New York that was led by Lori Blitzer, and together, the Israeli side and the American side carried the planning of the project forward for another year and a half until it was ready to be funded. And by the way, one of my future guests is Jeff Solomon, and we're going to be talking to him about this whole notion of venture philanthropy and how it applied to.
It was unbelievable because I recall my first meeting with Jeff on the subject with Lori and interviewing Lori. But it was I who insisted that you cannot have only an Israeli group planning this. And I fought for it because I believed very, very strongly that getting a group together, being led by Americans and Israelis, your team here and Lori's team there, and our meeting very often, I learned so much from that team of people who were half my age and well trained in fields I hadn't been trained in. I knew what to do with the questions we succeeded to provoke in these young people. I didn't know how to build the mechanisms to make this happen.
Because in essence, what Birthright does is, Birthright takes the logic of peoplehood and makes it real for all participants. Meaning, it's not about the state of Israel, it's not about religion, it's about the fact that participants from all over the world have a shared legacy and a shared destiny, and they're all connected. So Birthright is the quintessential peoplehood project of our generation.
No question about it. I moved from Birthright to becoming the international president of Hillel International, the first Israeli ever to be in that position. A ridiculous idea. They hired me because they didn't think they could find a suitable person in America. And I was hired to replace Richard Joel, who had been a phenomenal director. For me, it was the highlight of my career because I tried to steer a massive Jewish organization away from being a home for Jewish kids who are looking for a home on campus to being a place that would encourage Jewish kids to have Jewish questions. It was a change in concept about what an entire organization was. The organization was created in order to provide a home on campus for those kids who needed a home. But less and less Jews felt they needed a home. And the change we tried to bring around in my time was, how do you make Hillel the place that helps kids ask profound questions as Jews on the campus? It was extremely important. I loved doing it. It was without a doubt the height of my career.
So tell us about Honeymoon Israel, because I think that's an extremely interesting evolution of your work when it comes to peoplehood.
I mean, all of this goes back to saying being Jewish is not being normal. If I've in Hillel learned that 47% of the active Jewish students on campus, in my years at Hillel, 47% had only one Jewish parent. I come from a world in which intermarriage was either unknown or a terrible tragedy. Intermarriage was synonymous with assimilation. But if 47% of the kids on campus are products of intermarried homes, how can you talk about it as being assimilation? How can you just ignore it as half of our offspring? How can we lose them? Wasn't my idea. Other people battled with it, struggled with it, and they came to me and asked me if I would come and lead the educational process of Honeymoon Israel, which I still do to this day. And it is an amazing challenge because we deal with intermarried couples who are saying to us, or we are helping them say to us, our being intermarried does not necessarily mean that we want to assimilate.
You always say that an intermarried couple is a double or nothing, meaning if the family comes forward, it's actually expanding our people. If the family decides to join the Jewish people, to stay part of the Jewish people, it's actually expanding our people. And if they choose...
I never say to the non-Jewish couple, the non-Jewish member of the partner, now that you married a Jewess, that made you a Jew. I say to him, you married a member of my family. And therefore you become my responsibility. And I have the responsibility to say to you, I want you to help me with an issue I have. And that is how to ensure the continued significant renaissance of this Jewish people, a member of whom you married. Can you see a way in which you can do that? Can you help influence the kids that you're having together? Can you get involved in finding ways of making Jewishness important in your lives and allowing them to continue to be important in the life of your spouse? What an amazing experience. It is so difficult for the Jewish world to accept this. You know, I had to leave a synagogue in Jerusalem because from the moment I started to work with intermarried people, I was not given an aliyah in the synagogue as a very clear message. Avraham, you are supporting intermarriage. You are legitimizing intermarriage. I said, I never met these people before they intermarried. They've already done it. I now meet them after that, and I want to do what I can to ensure or to try to ensure that intermarriage does not have to be assimilation. And it's a program of intervention.
Avraham, I just want to encourage you by reminding you that when we worked on Birthright Israel in the 1990s, people called us post-Zionists, as if Birthright was an affront to the ideals of Zionism. So things change, things evolve over time. Every bold new idea has opposition from the establishment. That's just the way life is. We have to finish, and I do want to ask you a few quick questions, looking at your perspective about who's inspiring you. You are a person who inspired thousands of others. Who's inspiring you? So my first question is, who's the most remarkable non-living Jewish leader in your field, in the field of Jewish peoplehood?
As you know, this war that was going on, I've met with a lot of educators, I've met a lot of Jewish models. But on one morning, I met somebody who, for the first time, I said, I wish I could have been him. And who was that? That was a pilot who had moved to Israel as a kid, joined the Air Force, fought in the Air Force, had been flying sorties all over Iran for the previous 2 weeks. And here I see him flying his plane and bombing a prison in which people who were opposed to the Iranian government were being imprisoned, were being raped, were being punished, were being hurt, were being killed. And he was bombing the gates of this imprisonment in order to allow those people to escape and hopefully bring about change in Iran. First time in my life, I said, hey, it's not somebody who's got a good idea for me, it's somebody I'd like to follow. This is the first time I ever said, I wish that I was him. Why? Because for me, the real leader of Jewish life is my namesake, Avraham Avinu, the patriarch Avraham, who God said to him three things. Lech lecha, leave your home, leave your parents, go to something new that I will show you. Lech lecha. Secondly, build a family, have kids, build a family, make it into a tribe, build the tribes into a people. And then God says to Abram the third thing, and may all the peoples of this earth be blessed by this people's presence. That's what the Jews are in this world for all the other peoples in this world to be blessed by our presence. If I had to give that $1 million, I would be giving it to institutions, including one that you're very involved with, which are making sure that the Jewish people, because they are members of the Jewish people, are committed to making this a better place for all people.
I think this is a beautiful note to end on. But just to highlight that in those two verses, all origin stories of the Jewish people are embedded in those two verses in Sefer Bereshit, in the book of Bereshit. That at the origin story of Abraham, that we are a people, that we are a nation. It is a commandment by God that we have a relationship. We are introducing monotheism, the belief in God, in a single God that has no beginning and no end. This is a notion that changed humanity. And that the fourth story, that we have a mission to humanity, to be a light to the nations, to be a blessing for the families of the earth. And it's so beautiful that you would close on that, because the four founding stories of Judaism encapsulated in two verses in the book of Bereshit, and everything else ever since is just an interpretation of these narratives. And even in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, 1,100 words, all of these stories are there. We are anchored in a relationship with God. We're a people, we have a connection to the land, and we're commanded to be a blessing for the families of the earth.
This is why, Giddy, I would like to find a way of having every Jew in the world today vote on Israel's Declaration of Independence, a profound document, as a document that they identify with fully. Because it does all of the four things you spoke about. But that's my next venture in life.
Avram, you're my friend, you're my teacher, and I'm so happy and proud to have you as a guest here and actually on the opening episode of this podcast. So thank you very much. And I think like me, everybody listening to you will just see your passion through your amazing character, your beaming personality. Thank you very much for being here today.
Giddy, thank you very, very much for inviting me.
Friends, if you made it to this point, you just had the pleasure of listening to one of the greatest Jewish educators of our time, who has made Jewish peoplehood the cause of his life. I agree with Avraham that peoplehood is the most powerful, formative story of the Jewish people. You can read more about it in the first section of my book, Flexigidity, where I also discuss the other stories of nationhood, being a light unto the nations, and a community of faith. These 4 stories are ever present, not only in our founding texts, from the Torah to Israel's Declaration of Independence, but also in our minds and lives. Thank you for listening. That's it for today's episode of Flexigidity, the podcast of the Hebrew Man. Please share, subscribe, and stay tuned. See you next time.